The air inside the narrow living room felt heavy, thick with the silence that follows words left unsaid. Mai, 25 years old, slender with long black hair cascading over her shoulders, sat rigidly on the edge of the sofa. Her pale blouse clung to her as if it too sensed the weight of expectation pressing against her chest. Across from her, Lan, her 55-year-old mother-in-law, sat upright in an armchair that seemed like a throne. The older woman's face bore deep lines etched not only by age, but by years of commanding respect. Her dark dress amplified the authority she carried like a second skin. The son, Hui, hovered at the edge of the doorway, unsure whether to enter or retreat, his 30-year-old frame slouched in uncertainty. He had always lived suspended between two forces, the iron will of his mother and the quiet resilience of his wife. Today, that fragile balance quivered dangerously. Mai inhaled sharply, trying to steel herself. Since her marriage, every visit to this apartment had been a battlefield disguised as domesticity. The clink of teacups, the perfumed incense drifting from the family altar, even the muted tick of the wall clock, all became weapons in a war of dominance. She had been raised to respect elders, to lower her head and hold her tongue. But beneath that calm surface, frustration had been accumulating, like steam sealed in a pressure cooker. Lan adjusted her glasses, eyes narrowing as she looked Mai over with a gaze that stripped away dignity. "You never learned how to keep a household properly," she said in a voice that carried the chill of final judgment. "Look at the mess you've made of my son's life. Meals late, clothes wrinkled, no child yet. What kind of wife are you?" Each word struck Mai like a lash. She clenched her fists in her lap, nails digging into her palms. The urge to cry pressed behind her eyes, but she swallowed it down. Crying would only affirm Lan's power. Across the room, Hai opened his mouth as if to intervene, but his mother's sharp glance silenced him. He lowered his gaze, shame turning his face pale. The tension thickened. Mai's breathing grew uneven. She thought of her parents back in the countryside, who had entrusted her to this family with hope. She remembered the vows she had spoken on her wedding day, the dreams she had painted of harmony and partnership. All of it now seemed like faded ink on torn paper. Lan rose from her armchair and walked toward the young woman. Her steps were deliberate, each one echoing on the wooden floorboards like a gavel pounding in court. She leaned down, close enough that Mai could smell the faint bitterness of green tea on her breath. "You are unworthy," Lan whispered, her words a blade that cut deeper than any shout. "You are nothing!" Something inside Mai snapped. The silence of years, the swallowed words, the bowed head, the meek acceptance, shattered in an instant. Her body surged upward before her mind could catch up. Her hand flew, striking Lan's cheek with a crack that seemed to reverberate through the entire apartment. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The ticking clock faltered in her ears, the light from the window dimmed, and all that remained was the stunned expression on Lan's face. The older woman staggered back, one hand pressed against her reddening cheek, her eyes wide with disbelief that someone she considered inferior could defy her so openly. Hui gasped. He took a step forward but froze, torn between protecting his mother and standing by his wife. His lips trembled with words he could not form. Mai stood trembling, her hands still tingling from the impact. Horror and liberation collided inside her. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. In her chest, her heart pounded not just with fear of consequence, but with the strange exhilaration of finally speaking without words. Lan straightened slowly, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure rage. "How dare you?" she hissed, voice shaking. "Under my roof with my son watching, you will regret this until your last breath." Mai wanted to speak, to justify, to scream back the years of humiliation. But the words died in her throat. Only silence answered. The room had become a stage, and each of them played their part in a tragedy that had only just begun. Outside, the sound of traffic floated faintly through the window, indifferent to the storm raging inside. Neighbors laughed somewhere down the hall, unaware that within these walls, a family bond had fractured beyond repair. For the first time, Mai realized that this was not just a quarrel. It was the beginning of a war that would not end with apologies or reconciliation. The slap was a spark, and sparks, once lit, can set entire worlds on fire. The slap had not ended the confrontation. It had only begun it. Hours after the blow, the apartment still hummed with tension. Mai sat on the edge of the bed in the small guest room, her long black hair falling like a curtain around her face. The trembling in her hands had not ceased. She kept replaying the sound, the sharp crack of skin on skin, over and over, each echo reminding her of both her courage and her recklessness. Through the thin wall, muffled voices rose and fell. Lan was speaking in a furious rhythm, her words too muffled to catch, but the tone unmistakable. Condemnation, betrayal, wrath. Hai's voice answered in fragments, weak, placating, never strong enough to carry. Mai's lips tightened. He was still the boy who could not choose. She remembered his promises on their wedding day. "I'll protect you. You'll never be alone." Yet here she was, isolated, her heart thundering like a war drum. The door creaked open. Hai stepped in, his face pale, his shoulders hunched. He looked at her as if she were a stranger, not the woman he had chosen. "Mai," he began softly. His voice wavered. Why did you do that?" Her eyes lifted to meet his. They were not the tearful eyes of a guilty wife, but the burning eyes of a woman cornered too long. "Because I had to," she said. "Because your silence has killed me more than her words ever could." Hai flinched. He tried to speak, but the words tangled. His hand reached toward her, then fell to his side. He could not cross the distance. A knock came, sharp and deliberate. The door swung open before either of them answered. Lan entered, her dark gown flowing, her presence filling the small room. On her cheek bloomed the faint red mark, like a brand of rebellion. Her eyes were colder than steel. "You will apologize," she said, each word heavy with command. "On your knees, or you will never again set foot in this family's home." Mai stood. Her frame was slender, fragile even, but in that moment she seemed carved from stone. "No," she said simply. The air fractured. Hai gasped, torn between mother and wife, his mouth opening uselessly. Lan's lips curved into a thin smile, not of amusement, but of a predator circling prey. "Then you are no longer my son's wife. From this day you are nothing." She turned, sweeping from the room with the certainty of a queen delivering a sentence. The door slammed. Silence rushed in to fill the space, suffocating and final. Mai sank onto the bed, her knees weakening. Yet within the pounding of her heart was not only fear, it was a strange clarity. The war had declared itself, and wars are never fought without consequence. The following days unfolded like a storm trapped within walls. Nothing was spoken openly, yet every gesture, every silence carried the weight of an unspoken verdict. Mai tried to hold herself together. She woke early, brewed tea, prepared simple meals, moved quietly around the apartment. Her actions were precise, almost ritualistic, as though discipline could hold chaos at bay. Yet she felt Lan's presence everywhere, the way the older woman lingered in the hallway, the way her eyes followed her with a sharpened gaze that cut deeper than words. Hui had become a ghost in his own home. He drifted from one room to another, never meeting Mai's eyes for long. At night, he sat at the edge of the bed staring into his hands, muttering excuses that even he did not believe. "She's just hurt. You know how she is. Give it time." Mai swallowed her responses, though fire burned on her tongue. Time, she thought, was not a healer here. It was a weapon. One evening, the silence cracked. They sat together at dinner, the table set with plain bowls of rice and stir-fried vegetables. Hui barely touched his food, his chopsticks hovering nervously. Lan sat across from Mai, regal in her posture, her lips thin, her eyes unreadable. Without warning, Lan spoke. "Respect is not optional in this family," she said. Her voice was calm, but each syllable landed like iron. "A wife who strikes her elder is no wife at all." Mai's chopsticks froze mid-air. Her pulse thundered. She met Lan's gaze, refusing to look away. "And a mother who humiliates her son's wife ceases to be a mother," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. The room went still. Hui looked from one woman to the other, as though trapped in a burning room with no escape. His lips parted, but no words came. Lan's expression hardened into something colder than fury. She stood, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "Then you will leave," she declared. "Leave this house, leave my son, and leave the name you do not deserve." Mai's chest tightened, yet strangely she felt lighter. The choice had been dragged into the open. The war was no longer hidden in shadows. Later that night, she packed a small suitcase. Her hands moved steadily, folding clothes, tucking away the few belongings she could claim as hers. The lamp flickered on the nightstand, casting long shadows across the room. Hai stood in the doorway, silent, his face pale with indecision. "You could stop this," she whispered without turning. "You could stand once in your life." He said nothing. Her throat ached, but she lifted the suitcase and walked past him. Her footsteps echoed down the hall. Lan's shadow stretched across the threshold, tall and unyielding. For a moment, their eyes locked again, youth against age, defiance against dominion. Then Mai opened the door, and the night swallowed her. The night air was cool, almost gentle, yet Mai felt as though knives pressed against her skin. She walked quickly down the street, suitcase in hand, her footsteps loud against the empty pavement. Each step carried both relief and grief, the liberation of breaking free, the agony of leaving love behind. The city lights glimmered distantly, blurred by the sheen in her eyes. She remembered arriving here as a hopeful bride, her heart eager, her dreams stitched with promises. Now she left as an exile, carrying only fragments of herself. She found refuge at a small boarding house, a building with peeling paint and narrow halls. The landlady, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, gave her a room on the second floor. It was plain, a single bed, a creaking wardrobe, a window overlooking a dim alley. But for Mai, it was sanctuary. That night, she lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar hum of traffic, the faint bark of a stray dog, the whisper of her own doubts. She pressed her hand to her cheek where phantom heat from the long-past confrontation still lingered. The silence no longer carried Lan's shadow, yet it was heavier, because it carried absence. Days blurred into one another. She found work at a nearby cafe, wiping tables, carrying trays, smiling at strangers whose eyes never lingered long enough to notice her sorrow. The simplicity of routine dulled the ache. Yet sometimes, when she poured tea, she thought of the nights at home when she brewed it for Hai, waiting for him to drink with her. One evening, as she left work, she saw him standing by the corner. Hui. His figure was unmistakable, his shoulders hunched as though bracing against invisible weight. Their eyes met. Neither spoke for a long moment. The streetlight above flickered, casting them in alternating brightness and shadow. Finally, he said, "I couldn't stop her." Mai's lips parted, then closed again. She felt words surge within her, 1,000 accusations and 1,000 laments. But when she spoke, her voice was quiet, steady. "You didn't even try." He winced as though struck. "I wanted..." He stopped, searching for words that did not exist. "Come home, please. We can fix this." Her heart twisted. For an instant, she saw the boy she had fallen for, the man who once promised her a different life. But then she remembered the silence, the hesitation, the way he had stood still when she begged him to act. "No," she whispered, "not while she rules your home, not while you let her." Tears brimmed in his eyes, but he nodded, unable to refute her. He stepped closer, as though to reach for her, but she stepped back. The distance between them had already become an ocean. He left without another word. Mai stood under the flickering streetlight until the cold crept into her bones. That night, she returned to her small room. She sat by the window, watching the alley below. The city roared beyond, indifferent to her, pain, and yet in that indifference she found a strange strength. She was no longer defined by Lan's voice or Hai's weakness. She was her own. And perhaps exile was not only an ending, it was the beginning of something she had not yet named. News of Mai's departure spread faster than she could have imagined. In the neighborhood where Lan's presence loomed like a matriarchal crown, whispers floated from doorway to doorway. Some pitied Mai, others scorned her, but all repeated the same story. The daughter-in-law who struck her mother-in-law and fled. Lan embraced the whispers as though they were weapons. She walked the market streets with her chin high, her cheek healed but her pride unyielding. "A disgrace," she told anyone who asked. "She betrayed our family. She is no longer my son's wife." Her words fell like stones, heavy and irrevocable. Hai, however, shrank under the weight of rumor. At work, colleagues cast sideways glances. Old friends avoided his gaze. At night, he drank alone, his hands trembling as he poured glass after glass. His silence, once his shield, had become his prison. Meanwhile, Mai endured her own storm. At the cafe, she noticed the stares, the hushed voices behind her back. "That's her," someone would whisper. "The one who slapped her husband's mother." She kept her head low, focusing on her tray. but each word carved itself into her skin. One afternoon, she returned to the boarding house to find a folded letter slipped under her door. The paper was thin, the handwriting familiar. Hui's. Her heart tightened as she unfolded it. "Mai, I don't know how to carry the silence anymore. I miss you. I miss us, but I cannot leave her. She is my mother. Forgive me." Tears blurred her vision. She crushed the letter in her fist, then smoothed it out again, torn between fury and longing. His weakness still bound him, yet her heart still knew his name. That night she dreamed of confrontation. She dreamed of walking back into that apartment, standing tall before Lan, speaking words she had never dared to voice. In the dream, her voice thundered. In reality, it trembled. The next day, fate offered no dream but reality. Lan arrived at the cafe. She entered with the quiet confidence of a general on conquered ground, her dark gown flowing, her gaze sharp as glass. Conversation stilled as she approached Mai's counter. "You think exile saves you?" she said coldly. "No. Wherever you go, you carry shame." Mai's breath caught. Customers watched, waiting, some curious, some hungry for spectacle. For a moment, Mai considered silence, the easy path. But then she remembered the long nights alone, the taste of abandonment, the words that had burned unspoken in her throat. "No," she answered, her voice clear. "The shame is not mine. It is yours, for breaking your son, for poisoning your home, for turning love into war." Gasps fluttered through the cafe. Lan's face stiffened, her authority cracked by the force of unexpected resistance. The older woman leaned closer, her whisper colder than any shout. "This is not over." She turned and left, her steps sharp, her shadow trailing like a warning. Mai stood trembling, but her chest felt lighter. The silence had been broken. And once a voice is found, it cannot be silenced again. The cafe incident marked a turning point. For the first time, Mai had not just defended herself, but challenged Lan in front of others. The echoes of her words lingered in the neighborhood. Some whispered admiration, others muttered disapproval, but all agreed on one thing. The silence was over. Lan retreated, but not in defeat. Her pride was too deeply rooted. At home, she sharpened her strategy, speaking to Hui in private, weaving her authority into every word. "She humiliates you in public," she told him. "Do you still call her wife? A real man would sever such disgrace." Hui sat at the table, head bowed, glass untouched before him. His silence no longer shielded him. It smothered him. He wanted to shout, to defend Mai, to reclaim the courage that had abandoned him, but each time his mother's voice pressed down, he collapsed further into himself. Mai, meanwhile, began to find a strange strength in solitude. Her days at the cafe became steadier, her nights less haunted. Yet sometimes, when the lamp flickered in her small room, she found herself staring at Hai's crumpled letter, torn between longing and betrayal. One evening, Hai appeared at her door. His face was drawn, his eyes rimmed red. He stood in the narrow hallway like a man who had lost the map to his own life. "Mai," he whispered. I don't know who I am anymore." She looked at him, her heart pounding, but her voice stayed firm. "Then find out. But don't come to me broken, expecting me to mend you. Not while she still owns your spine." His shoulders sagged. He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. The distance between them was more than space. It was truth. Days later, Lan struck again. This time she arrived at the cafe with two neighbors, women who had always followed her shadow. Together, they cornered Mai during a lull in business. Their words were not shouted but dripped like venom. "Shameless," one hissed. "Unfilial," said the other. Lan stood silent, her eyes sharp, letting others deliver her judgment. Mai's hands trembled on the counter, but she forced her chin high. "If shame is to defend myself, then I will carry it proudly. If duty means silence under cruelty, then I refuse it." The women gasped, retreating slightly. Even Lan blinked, caught off guard by the steady defiance. But her voice soon returned, cold as ever. "Defiance is nothing without consequence, and consequences always come." Her words hung like a curse. That night, Mai could not sleep. She stood at the window of her small room, staring out at the dim city lights, her reflection faint in the glass. She was no longer the same woman who had entered the apartment months ago. The scars of conflict had reshaped her, forged steel beneath her skin, and though fear still lingered, a stronger truth had begun to rise. She would not kneel again. Rumors spread faster than footsteps. Within days of the confrontation at the cafe, the entire neighborhood had become a chorus of whispers. Some praised Mai's courage, others condemned her sharpness, but all spoke her name with a weight it had never carried before. For Lan, the humiliation was unbearable. She was not merely a mother-in-law anymore. She was a matriarch whose authority had been questioned. She struck back in subtler ways. Every morning she stood at the entrance of the apartment building, her gaze piercing. Tenants passing by would bow slightly, careful not to fall into her disfavor. When they paused to greet Mai, Lan's silence alone was enough to chill their warmth. Hui, caught between the two, began to unravel further. He avoided both women, leaving early, returning late, his face pale from exhaustion. He drank more, smoked more, as though he could bury himself in the fog of his own avoidance. But fog never hides, it only blinds. Mai pressed on at the cafe, her pride stitched into every movement, yet loneliness wrapped around her shoulders like an old shawl. Nights became heavier, her dreams tangled with echoes of voices that accused, cursed, and demanded her silence. One night, she dreamt of drowning. A vast river pulled her down, and above the surface Lan's figure loomed like a statue, unmoving, judging. Mai woke gasping, sweat dripping, only to find herself staring at the shadow of her own reflection in the cracked mirror. The next day, Lan escalated her war. She confronted Mai not with insults but with cold formality. Entering the cafe, she placed a small envelope on the counter. Inside was money, enough to sting, not enough to save. "Take it," Lan said. "Leave this place. Leave my son. Find dignity somewhere else." The words struck harder than any slap. Customers fell silent, eyes darting between the two women. Mai's hand hovered over the envelope, then clenched into a fist. "I will not be bought," she replied, her voice low but steady. "My dignity does not come with a price tag." Lan's lips curved into a thin smile. "Then you will learn it the hard way." After she left, the cafe air remained heavy, as though invisible smoke lingered. Mai stood tall, but when she finally closed for the night, her knees trembled. She leaned against the counter, swallowing tears, not from weakness but from the unrelenting weight of the battle. Later, Hai arrived, smelling faintly of alcohol. His eyes searched hers with a desperate plea. "I don't want to lose you, Mai, but I can't fight her. I'm not like you." Her silence stretched, then broke like glass. "Then maybe you don't deserve me." For the first time, the words left her lips not in anger but in sorrow. He staggered back as though struck, and the room seemed to close in around them both. That night, Mai walked alone through the quiet streets. The neon lights blurred, her steps echoing on the empty pavement. She felt both hollow and hardened, as though her heart had cracked, yet something sharper was being forged inside. The fracture had come, and from fractures either ruin or rebirth would rise. The days that followed blurred into one long storm. Every hour carried the weight of unspoken words. Every corner seemed haunted by the clash between Mai and Lan. The fracture had widened. Nothing could bridge it now. Lan, unwilling to accept defeat, made her last move. She summoned Hui into the family's old apartment, the one filled with heavy furniture and photographs that seemed to breathe authority. She spoke in a tone both tender and sharp, weaving guilt like a net. "If you do not end this, you will lose me. Choose Hui, your blood or your wife." Hui's hands trembled around the glass of water he held. His eyes shifted from the floor to the photographs of ancestors lining the wall. Generations stared down at him, their silent judgment suffocating. At last he broke. Tears slipped down his cheeks, not from love, but from failure. Meanwhile, Mai prepared herself. She had no plan of surrender. She polished the cafe counter as though it were a shield, stacked cups with quiet precision, her breath steady despite the storm in her chest. When Lan finally arrived, the air itself seemed to stiffen. Customers scattered, sensing the gravity of the moment. Lan's voice cut through the silence. "This ends tonight. Leave my son, or you will face shame you cannot bear." Mai looked straight into her eyes. Her voice was calm, almost soft. "Shame has been my companion for too long. It no longer frightens me, but your cruelty should frighten you." The words echoed like steel striking stone. Lan faltered for a moment, only a moment, but it was enough for everyone to see. For the first time, the matriarch's authority cracked. Hai entered then, stumbling between them, his face pale, lips trembling. "Stop," he pleaded. "Please stop. I cannot hold either of you anymore." His voice broke, and with it, his fragile image of control. Mai's heart clenched, but she did not waver. She stepped forward, her chin high, her voice steady. "Then let go, Hai. Let go of what destroys you." Lan gasped, fury rising, but the room had shifted. Customers, neighbors, strangers, all were watching, and their silence was no longer hers to command. That night, Mai returned to her small room. She stood before the window one last time, the city's lights shimmering like distant promises. The battle had cost her dearly, love, peace, even parts of herself. But it had also left her with something unbreakable. Her voice. She whispered into the night, not for anyone else but herself. "I am still here." The city did not answer, but the quiet strength in her reflection did. From ashes, a new dawn would come,